So what does Peter Lindbergh mean for you? And maybe let's go through the lens of the name of the exhibition, which is Lightness of Being. What do these words mean for you? And what does Peter Lindbergh mean for you?
I mean, look, I think it's important to see this whole thing as a contest. If you want to understand an artist, if you want to understand probably everybody, I think there's three different parts. There's his work, there's where he comes from, and there's his personality. And what's interesting is you have two, you find a pretty good interpretation of the third. If you know somebody's work and you know where he comes from, you probably can kind of tell what kind of a person he is. You know what I mean? If you know somebody's personality and you know where he comes from, you can probably say a lot about his work, you know? And with Peter, it's a bit a similar thing. I mean, if you look, for example, he comes from a very particular part in Germany, I think, you know. Peter is born 1944. Now, he comes from a very industrial zone, but sort of the industrial heart of German manufacturing. Now think about it. I think, you know, I had a quick conversation yesterday actually with some of you people, you know, talking about that there's a war going on right now, and I think some of you people been reminded about something that is maybe, you know, for your parents or grandparents not that far. 1944 in Germany, this guy is born. I mean, I think we can talk about how much consciousness do you have, but there's obviously some. But the guy started his life in shelters. You know, mother scared, in and out of shelters. I mean, that area, that particular area where Peter is from, was bombed to the ground because that's where the main production for the war was going on in Germany, Duisburg. And then it's not that this one-year-old little boy starts bringing up I mean, that was brutal. My dad is the same generation, you know. They came out of the shelters, they were burned people on the ground, you know. Those are the first impressions you have. Then there is after the war, there is complete destruction. And then he comes from a generation, they start asking questions. They're very suspicious because more and more is coming up. And the more they looked at the generations before them and they said, how much did you know? Were you part of this? You know? And what did you do? And that's a very significant part of that German generation from Peter growing up, you know. For example, I mean, I don't know if you guys have more affiliations with fashion. If you look at fashion photographers from England, they mostly come from subculture. The identity has a lot of been guided by music, you know. Peter, or like the Germans we don't have a subculture. There was nothing going on. Peter's subculture, Peter's growing up in art school. So it's a more poetic view on things. And I think that's something that's very significant in his art, I think, you know. He's not a guy that has been deeply influenced by the Kings or David Bowie, you know, as most British fashion photographers working today, you know, there was always the part of David Bowie and then later on maybe the Face, certain magazines and, you know. So I think Peter's coming from a more gentle, definitely more poetic approach.
Wow, that's a very beautiful start. But let's get to the photography and the fashion part of it. So when he starts making photography, in what ways do you feel that his upbringing contributed to that? Is that like some longing for some golden age or a golden era?
No, but I think if you look at Peter's work, I'm always going a bit back. I hope you don't think that's boring. But like I said, I think what I try to do is I give you a bigger picture of what's behind this. And how do I put this? Look, in art, in politics, you have switches between realism and idealism. Now I go really back. My sister would say, "Stop talking about the war, Grandpa." But let's go back to if you just quickly to put this in context. If you think this is really boring, please ask me questions, and then we get off the subject. 1900, idealism. Painting got to an incredible level, quality-wise. Now, suddenly, in this time, but most of the subject of painting was Greek mythology, or religious. Suddenly there is a painter called Millet who goes out on the fields and paints farmers. Nobody's done that. And he doesn't paint farmers in beauty or, heroic. He paints the hardship, It's not going well. Then there is another one called Courbet, called social realism. And these guys, they went out of the studio and they said, they reduced the distance to the person. Now you see something very similar. I'm still talking about Peter Lindbergh, by the way. You see a similar thing, Hollywood 30s, 40s, Men wear tuxedos, women wear incredibly dresses, 1945, the war is over. In Italy, there's directors like Roberto Rossellini who starts using the equipment that's been left over from the reportage of the war, the films, the cameras, makes a movie called Rome Open City, uses amateur actors. He's on the person. There's an incredible film. If you guys have the chance, maybe some of you have seen this film called The Bicycle Thief. Anybody have seen that one? The Bicycle Thief is about a man that his entire life depends on a bicycle and it gets stolen. The well-being of his family, his work, his dignity, and his morality. So they take this bicycle away and everything goes to hell. In the end, he becomes a thief himself. So you see I don't want to get too political, but the product is more defining than the person. Deeply socialistic ideas. Why do I say this? Peter Lindbergh. 1970s, mid-70s, things become, we get a little bit closer to, appearance becomes more important, fashion becomes more important, modeling becomes more important. The first modeling agency opens up in New York called Zoli. There's Sophia Loren says she walked in New York into a room full of beautiful women. She said she's never seen anything like this. They had no reason to be there. That was an impressive thing back in the day. That's mid-late 70s. Disco comes up. Polyester shirts, John Travolta, you remember Saturday Night Fever? Interesting film because the guy sells paint in the day and he's a king at night. So what we learn is suddenly what becomes important is background and accessories. How do I present myself? And then early 80s, MTV starts. And suddenly music is not about music anymore. Music is about looking good. You have to look good to be a good musician because you have to be on camera. That's the early 80s. That's when I grow up. Peter in the early 80s, still talking about Peter Lindbergh, Peter's already a well-working fashion photographer in the mid-80s. He already shot for Vogue in the early 80s, but he hasn't really found it yet. Something is missing. And 1985, Richard Avedon brings out a book called In the American West. Are you aware of that? It's just very simple portrait, white background, changes the face of photography. Because it's Peter Lindbergh, it's the concept of no light, no composition, no background, nothing, taking everything away. There's just the person as being a symbol of the human condition. Big word, but very important. And I think so. What it is, to answer your question, what Avedon has done and what he inspired is that we pay attention to the unanticipated beauty, to the one that's been overlooked. It's not the 70s glam, the models, the more beautiful, the exaggeration of everything, the shoulder pads, the MTV. I mean, any of you who kind of remembers the 80s, I remember Dallas and Dynasty, they look like football players, these women, talking about the women. So I think Peter looked at that and he understood what you do as a photographer, and you will see this with most photographers you heard of. And what's very interesting is the other show you have here, and I think it's very clever of you guys to put these shows next to each other. Elisabetta?
Elisabetta Borodina, yes.
Elisabetta. As a photographer, you make a choice how you represent the aesthetic distance. Now, you can extend the aesthetic distance. You know, that's what Elisabetta is doing. So the pictures become pushed and exaggerated, and women are larger than life, and they're more beautiful, and there's the colors and the makeup, and they look just incredible. And then you do what Peter does, you reduce the aesthetic distance. You shoot supermodels like they just come from the supermarket, you know? And that changed everything, you know, because it's not what Peter says, a woman shouldn't be background, or a person shouldn't be background and decoration. I just don't want that. I want to take that away. So I think when you look at this, now this guy, again, grows up in Duisburg, sad part of Germany, completely destroyed, cheaply rebuilt. And I think there's something you see in his pictures is these are the women. First of all, in Peter Lindbergh's world, the sun never shines, right? Because in Duisburg, the sun never shines. You know, it's gray. It's like it's industrial. There's smoke. So it's always a bit flat, but it's real. He saw women. When this guy went to school in the morning, he saw women with hair sticking to their faces because it was raining, it was cold, slightly frozen, going upon their day, going to work, you know, taking the tram, the subway, the bicycle, you know. That's the idea of a woman he's growing up with. And I think you can see how deeply this is engraved in the way he loved women in that sense, because he reduced the distance. I can talk about this for hours, by the way. Mm-hmm. You also have it in French movies, you know, the French Nouvelle Vague, you know, they put a guy with, you know, Hollywood had these big cameras, they couldn't really move. Hitchcock, everything was a set. Jean-Luc Godard makes a movie, Breathless. He put a guy with a camera in a wheelchair. One guy was rolling the guy. The guy was just filming down the street. Completely new, cameras wobbling, but it reduces the distance to the girls. And I think Peter's entire idea says, that's where the beauty is. It's in reducing the distance, you know. And I think that's what he brought to fashion. You know?
There is like widely two separate ways of perceiving beauty. Like there is one way which is that beauty is something that reveals that which is inside, and there is a way of looking at beauty which is that beauty is hiding that which is inside. And obviously they're both true in certain ways, but different artists like to accentuate one or the other. And also we have different eras, whether we trust beauty, and like you were mentioning before, like in the 40s, we see that beauty is basically a proxy of well-being, a proxy of health, a proxy of everything that is good and that we try to strive towards. And in the past, let's say 10, 15, 20 years, maybe even from the beginning of 90s, there's been a very different wave, which is that beauty, we should be suspect of beauty, and beauty is hiding something. Like if something looks beautiful, then that means that behind it there must be some dark reason for it.
Because I think we also exaggerated this, but like I said, it is the same thing you have in policy. I think once one of those movements has been oversaturated, the audience will go against it. We're sick of it. If we have too much MTV, we go to Nirvana and to Tracy Chapman.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and we can't listen to it anymore. I think there needs to be breath. But then also, if we have too much Nirvana, at some point we want to see Beyonce on stage again. Give me a real show. Give me a real movie. I mean, I love a real movie. It doesn't always need to be a French movie where people, dying in the rain or like crying. You know. But I think that the truth is. The truth is, and I think what Peter understood, and he understood it much better than me and much earlier, is that the quality of a picture, the way it's aging, you know, these photographers who exaggerate, they very successful in the moment, but it doesn't age well. And if you look at all the work that's aging, you know, because all the movies, all the pictures, because you somehow found something that represents the human condition. big word, but these people are real. They're like you and me, you know? They may not be Giselle. You know, right now, I mean, just this morning, I saw the new campaign from Balmain with Giselle. You probably haven't seen it, but look at it. I mean, they stretched it. They you know, the hair is like this, and you know, I mean, there's not one pixel in that picture that hasn't moved artificially. But it's a very impressive picture. I mean, and it's Giselle. I mean, I worked with Giselle. I mean, she's pretty. You know, it's there. You know, it's not all a lie. You know? But so is Cindy, and you know, they're there. You know, but again, it's literally this. It's like make them connect with them. You know, Peter, by the way. He didn't love to talk about beauty. I think he wasn't like a guy that talks about theory so much, but he loved to talk about intimacy. That was his subject, you know.
And how do you feel he managed that in his work?
The intimacy?
Yes.
That is his talent, and I think that's the hardest to, you know, look, it's not about taking the picture for a photographer. It's about seeing that picture, you know? There is a mirror, there is a sense of revelation. You will see, through that picture, you will see Peter. This is not Christy. Christy, and especially these girls, they've been, I love it that these pictures are behind us, so I can always just go like that. But, you know, it's true, it's probably one of his landmark shots, you know? But, like I said, in those days, these girls were shot by so many people. And you will have very few pictures that age as well as these ones do, you know? But we had to go through that. Now, Peter is always saying, he was accused, and it's a bit of a back and forth. People said he doesn't like fashion, you know? Fashion is conventional beauty and all that. And he said, it's not that I don't like fashion, I just don't give a shit about it. You know, I just don't want it to get in my way. Give me something that doesn't bother me, you know? And I understand that very well, because you don't want the fashion to get the attention, you know? You want the woman to get the attention. Do you know that story from American Vogue? Somebody?
That story?
Peter loved to tell. Peter was a very confident guy. You know, he was kind of cocky, he was very sweet, but he was very confident and very, you know, he knew who he was. You know, he was not like, he was not like, you know, there's a word for it in English, the self-deprecating artist, the one who's always like, I'm like this, and like, I'm not good enough, you know, always sitting at home, you know. But he was very confident about his work. So the story goes like this. Talking about, like, you know, I go back to this, whatever, MTV mid-'80s, 88. Check out this picture over there with the white shirts, by the way. 1988. Peter works a lot in Europe, but not in America. American Vogue has been run by Grace Mirabella and Alex Lieberman, legends of fashion. You know, they've been there since Napoleon died. They own this place, you know. You could not move them without digging up the earth. They were like growing into it. Anyway, so Peter was invited by, and again, Peter loved telling the story, you know. He was invited by Alex Lieberman, who was a true legend, to go to America, go to New York, and he was hesitant to shoot for American Vogue. He didn't really want to do it. So Alex Lieberman is like, so, mister, you know, I guess a little bit with, who the fuck are you? Do you know who I am? You know, it's like, I hear you don't want to work for us. And Peter is like, I know who you are, really appreciate it. I mean, you know, I know everything you've done, but I can't shoot that woman. He's like, what do you mean? Like that woman you show. This is the woman in the 1987, 1988, the very decorated. Back in the day, again, that's interesting. Peter made no distinction between personal and private work, personal and commercial work. Avedon really did. Avedon shot all the American Vogue covers, also since Napoleon died, and they were all the same. They were all like this, beautiful women, close up. That was the American Vogue cover. Now, so Alex Lieberman asked Peter, why don't you want to work with us? He's like, I just don't see that woman. I'm going to be a disaster. You're not going to like what I do. And Alex is, I tell you something. You take a stylist you want, you take a few girls, you go wherever you want to go. Don't worry about it. Do what you want. Come back, show me what woman you want to do. Peter's like, great, let's go. He goes to LA. He takes a stylist. He takes that picture over there with the white with the white shirts. That must be from '88, right? Can somebody look at that?
Yeah, it's '88.
All right. There's another picture where they're laughing a bit more. It's one of the only laughing picture I've ever seen from Peter. He goes back with those pictures to Lieberman and to the Vogue offers, and Lieberman and Grace are like, okay, what is this? He's like, well, you asked me to take some pictures, he's like, there's no fashion. And he's like, yeah, but I thought this is just about see what the woman, they're like, oh, yeah, don't call us, we call you, So basically he's like, okay, whatever, didn't work out. 6 months later, true story, 6 months later, Grace Mirabella is out, Alex Lieberman is out, they cut down the tree, and Lieberman was a great guy, And Anna Wintour walks in, who is the new tree, and who's there since then, And Anna looks at those pictures, in some drawer, calls Peter and says, can you come back? Because I would have given you 20 pages and the cover, And he's like, okay, are you sure? He's like, I'm sure. So they do a shoot at Place de la Concorde in Paris, And that also shows you how fashion is. Fashion is so unflexible and people are so uptight. Anybody from fashion here? Sorry, no disrespect. But it's, like I said, for me, when I hear that story. So a breakthrough in Peter, one of the biggest breakthroughs in Peter's career is 1988, he's booked to shoot a Vogue cover right after this. Again, like a complete twist of destiny that Alex suddenly, if Alex would have been fired 5 years later, which easily could have happened, this thing would have not happened. So they go on Place de la Concorde and they shoot a girl called Michaela Bersoux, and they put a Christian Lacroix top, and because they said it's a beauty picture, she keeps her jeans on, like her jeans, whatever, like model kind of like, old, like ripped jeans. And, he shoots this in 35, so the format is longer than and he's just shooting it, and he doesn't worry about what's going on at the bottom, because usually they would cut it off. It's a cover, they said he's going to cut in, So Anna Wintour chooses out of the series a picture that revolutionized fashion. She's not looking in the camera, she is laughing, she's looking off, and she wears haute couture with jeans. So everybody's like, this is a revolution. Like when Christian Lacroix started using zippers instead of buttons, everybody felt, that's the end of the world. But that's true. Like I said, this is also fashion. So, like I said, Peter was maybe a little bit more relaxed, but that was Peter's first American Vogue cover. And if you look today at whatever, 100 years of fashion, 100 years of American, 100 years of Vogue, these two shots are there. That really changed a lot.
But so does that mean that it's just a question of timing, that you have somebody like Anna Wintour who can see that the tide is changing, and he can spot somebody who also feels that the tide is changing, and then it's just a coincidence basically that was bound to happen anyway?
Well, John Travolta says on Saturday Night Fever, he says, in life there's, no, actually, you know what, I'll give you another example. Bob Evans, who produced The Godfather, says there is no luck. There is opportunity meets preparation. And that's really it. You get your shot, but you got to be ready. And he took it. So it's not just that 1988, he starts working for American Vogue, which gives him a huge commercial success. But in your whole exhibition, every single picture is not from American Vogue. It's from Italian Vogue. 1989, Franca Sozzani takes over Italian Vogue. So there's a huge switch. And Franca says, I let you do it. Franca understands him. Blind trust gives him 20, 30 pages. All of this was for British Vogue. But all of these other, and you see it's a little bit more commercial. The hair, you see it's a little, that's Christie in Italian Vogue. That's Christie in it's just a little bit, And then he works for Franca for, honestly, until the day he dies. Not just that, but the tragedy is that Franca dies of cancer, tell you the truth, I'm not sure, 2 months before or 2 months, I think 2 months after Peter. So this absolute powerhouse of this monument of fashion, Peter Lindbergh and Franca Sozzani, suddenly disappear. And when the curtain falls, Kim Kardashian comes out, and we all thinking you can't be serious, you know? The true story, you know, that is it. That is the new, that is the new thing, you know, that is the new black, you know, it's the Kardashians. And I remember, tell you the truth, the last conversation I had with Peter was that he says, I don't know who to shoot. I don't know who to shoot anymore. Because he was so on the woman. And we don't produce these women anymore. He found those. He found them. And he told me, yeah, I shoot this girl Gigi right now. Yeah. It's like, what, Gigi? It's like, yeah, you know, Gigi Hadid, Gigi, you know. It's like, okay. It's like, what do you think? It's like, You know? It's not the same, you know. It's not the same.
But
know?
what's the difference? Like, try to explain it to a layperson like me. What is the difference?
They've been
manufactured?
No, but what's the difference of Ingrid Bergman and Anne Hathaway? You know, what's the difference of Grace Kelly and, you know, whoever, Dakota Fanning, you know? It's hard to say. You know, I was just in Italy, and I had a project. I was working with the Italian movie studio Cinecittà. Have you heard of them? Every Italian movie has been run through Cinecittà. That's the one studio. It's a studio in Rome. Every Sophia Loren, that bicycle thief movie, every Federico Fellini movie. And we talked about that. I said, you know, let's shoot some Italian actresses. They're like, yeah. I was like, who would you shoot? They're like, you know. I was like, okay, let's shoot some French actresses. They're like, yeah, yeah, great idea. There's nobody there, you know. They don't have them anymore. We don't know. There's a mystery. It's true. I mean, we all ask ourselves that question, you know. But why, if you look at that, there used to be a quality and a magnetism, you know. And if you look at these girls, I think, I didn't work with Tatiana, but I worked with all of them, you know. And it's there. But you have to guide them. And Peter knew how to handle them. And he said when you, and he loved talking about this, he said when there is a conversation, there is intimacy, that was his thing. And he says you take it away. He says the camera reveals something. You don't look at a camera, you look at a person. When you look at these, they not seem to be photographed. Peter started off shooting children. And I think he still wants women to be children. There's an unawareness, an unconsciousness of the camera. You know, even when they look at the camera, they don't look at a camera. They look at a person. They look at you.
But do you have a theory? Like, is it just that life has gotten simpler, or could it be the fact that now people who become models, women who become models, they know it from such an early age that they're not given the opportunity to have a character?
I mean, a selfie is a disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, photographers, you know, we had people, if you worked with Peter 3 times, he'd teach you how to be. Now, some get it better, some get it less. He also knew, obviously, the ones he liked to work with, they got it better. I mean, if you look at those films that were running over there, look how, you know, Mila Jovovich, I mean, you know, there's this one little part of that movie that's running over there, and she's just on the street talking to herself, like, I mean, you know, who does this today? You know, girls would be like this, you know, or they do the arms in the air. I mean, as a photographer, you cringe under the table when you see how girls pose, because they think technically the girlfriend can do the shot with an iPhone, but there's no guidance, there's no story, there's no thought. Because Peter knew what to look for. Now, maybe Stephen Meisel or Mario Testino or other photographers looked for something else, but he looked for that person behind it. It was a portrait, you know. It was not a fashion picture. Funny, actually, that guy he kind of like fired Peter. Alex Lieberman said, a good passion picture is a picture of a woman. It's not a picture of a dress, you know. For some reason, I think that's really what defines him, you know. But obviously, there was a certain right time, right place. But it's true, there is, you know, as any photography, any picture is self-revelation. This is not them. This is Peter being them. Every photographer creates the world he likes to live in. meets the women he wants to meet. He creates that. He said, that hair, that makeup, that moment, could be a little bit more like that. Look, there's never any forced sexuality in Peter Lindbergh's pictures, because the way he said he connected with women was in art school. There's something also you see, any photographers here? Motivation is a big problem. It's not a big problem, it's a big subject for Peter. Now, Peter used to shoot women smoking, right? That was a big problem when there was a smoking ban. Why? Because if a woman is smoking, she has something to do. She's relaxed, she's doing something, And then it's funny, you can see this here in a couple of shots. Then they couldn't use the cigarettes anymore. They used cappuccino cups, the little plastic cups, There's actually a very good, a very famous, the actress coach from Marlon Brando, her name is Stella Adler, and she talks about expression through the object. That means as soon as the actor has something he holds, he seems more natural in the moment. Now, as a model, either they're posing, which is definitely not what Peter wanted, or they're just standing there, which is nothing, So how to create a motivation in a very cinematic sense that you said, in cinema you call it being moment to moment, that this is an actual, out of that moment coming scene that leads to another one. It's not preconceived, it's not premeditated, And again, like I said, look, there's obviously those women he picked, they knew how to do that, Linda, they shot a lot at pin-up studios. And I think the story always is that Linda went into pin-up when she was working with Peter, and she was like, who am I going to be today, And Peter is like, oh, Marlene Dietrich. He's like, oh my God, let's go blonde. Great, let's do it, Because everybody was shooting Linda back in the day. Everybody, and then you always had to reinvent Linda, and that's what they don't do anymore, The girls just want to be themselves, and they think it's all about appearance,
There is a quote on the wall back there which says that wonder is the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you?
Well, that's pretty much what he says. Who has the greatest wonder? It's the children, There is an incredible wonder, seeing things for the first time and experiencing that, And I think we always like to get back to that, We like to see things like we've never seen them, And I think that's a lot how Peter shots. There's an innocence also in the black and white. If you look at Peter's pictures, they're very simple. They're almost naive, And within that naivety, these sets you've seen, and that's something a little bit, Helmut Newton said that too. He says, there's so much production and so many assistants, and Peter had 8 assistants. I mean, these are teams of 20, 30 people. But when you do the shot, you have to make it disappear. And Helmut also said, he says, I have this really clear-cut idea, but I want it to look like an accident. Francis Bacon, same thing. He said, I want a very ordered picture, painting, but I want to find it by accident. And when Peter has these huge movie sets built, sometimes you see it, sometimes there's a shot of the set, but then he shoots the girl right when the hair and makeup is picking on her, when she's waiting for whatever, the smoke, the pizza, waiting. And then he says, within that set, he's looking for the lucky accident because it's credible and it's motivated moment to moment. The last thing he wants is exactly Balmain, Giselle, this, the hair. There's a long thing we could discuss. I don't know how much time we get. Peter had an incredible, antagonism with fashion. And then fashion developed into retouching. He hated retouching. He couldn't stop talking about it, how much he thinks, why would you remove what somebody is from this person's face?
This is the beauty, hiding the truth.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's an incredible, I don't know how much time we have, but there's a lot.
We have about 10 minutes.
There's just a lot to say about that, and then, look, there's a beautiful thing Peter said, if we have 10 minutes. How do I say that? In the moment of photography, I hope you find this interesting, In the moment of photography, there is a conscious part that meets the unconscious part. Part of you knows what to do, but part of you is just reacting. And by projecting the unconscious part, on a document, on a photograph, and looking at it, you reveal something of yourself. Does it make sense? It's true? I don't know if I explained this well. Peter says something similar. So there is a part of a picture that you are not aware of. It's taken in 125th of a second. Peter says a creative act is always a birth. And he says everything comes from something. Nothing comes from nothing. So he says there is something that you're looking for, yet that you're collecting. There is, you're looking for a particular feeling. You're soaking it up. You're a sponge of your own experience. I'm mixing too many quotes, but David Bowie says something really beautiful. He says, getting older means becoming the person you were always supposed to be. So Peter says the same thing. He says the process of creativity is a revealing renaissance of everything you've been through. And that what makes you, it's the experience, the emotional scars and ups and downs that is a reservoir of what you are. I give you something really different. Should I? You remember the movie The Blade Runner? Really? Okay, I tell you quickly for the ones who don't know this, because it's also interesting for photography in general. In The Blade Runner, they're fabricating robots who are so well done that partly the robots themselves, and definitely the people around them, don't know anymore if they're robots. And the way they're doing this is because they give them memories and experiences from other people. Now, I think what's interesting about this is, if you think about it today, through the media, through the social media, through television, a lot of what we are is memories from others. It's not our own. We react to them, we feel them, but we didn't have them. They've been packaged for us. And I think also that tells you a lot about AI and where things may possibly go. So even in these robots are, sort of emotionally, they still are their own experiences, So I think it's very interesting interpretation. That's what Peter is saying, Like, what we have to have today in photography, and what Peter really said, what Peter really forced. And that's also interesting, without any judgment of Elisabetta, there needs to be a definition of what's a photograph and what's a computer. There will be very soon needs to be a definition of what's a model and what's a computer, what's AI, what's a person and what's artificial. At this point, we don't have to define that, But in the Blade Runner, they're defining it.
Beautiful. Is there anything else you want to say before I guess we can have time for like 1 or 2 questions from the audience as well? To wrap up the very easy topic of Peter Lindbergh.
Remember the end of the Blade Runner? I give you something because I think it has a lot to do with Peter. All the way at the end, look, I'm making this a bit poetic, because Peter was a very poetic guy, and if you look at his picture, he was really looking for poetry. And at the end of the Blade Runner, there's a very poetic moment where the robot dies. And his last words, very beautiful, he said, wait, let me get it together. He says, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. I've seen battleships explode on the shoulder of Orion. I've seen sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhäuser Gate. I felt the wind in my hair. And he says, all those moments will be lost, like tears in the rain. Now, all of us in this room, we've seen things the person right next to us wouldn't believe. The person you spent the last 10 years with doesn't believe. Now, he might believe what you've seen, but he doesn't believe what you felt when you've seen it. And I think that's what Peter says, this is what's defining us. What do you feel when you see things is what uniquely defines you as a person. I can go on, but I think...
That's very beautiful. Wow. Let's have one or two questions from the audience, and then we're going to wrap up. Do we have anybody that wants to ask a question?
Come on, don't be shy. I know you're going to talk to me when I'm out there. You know? You just don't want to do... I have to do this too, you know. Don't leave me alone up here, you know. And sometimes some of you will ask questions. They're very interesting for the others, trust me. You know, I always have this that when I go out and sometimes I talk and then somebody said, and I was like, I wish you would have asked me that because that was really interesting for everybody, you know. Oh, well, back in the day, yeah.
What is the first photograph from Peter that you remember?
Peter did a story, very clear. It's a story in Morocco. I don't know if you have it here. I think it was for Marie-Claire Bies. You know, look, I don't know if you know that. In the late 80s, in '89, when Peter started working when he started becoming that Peter Lindbergh that we know, I was a waiter in New York City working for $20 a day. I had no money. I think I had less. And I was buying old fashion magazines. You could buy used fashion magazines on the street for $1. So you could buy maybe the Vogue from January, you could buy in May for $1. And that's what I've done. And that's how I discovered that those were those pictures. And there was a very beautiful magazine back in the day, Marie-Claire Bies, very special, very much related to, very dedicated to photography. And he did a beautiful story back then in Morocco. You know, the early Peter Lindbergh, and it's not the early Peter Lindbergh, the early Peter Lindbergh of the one we know, all of this started in the late 80s, early 90s. And if you look at the older pictures, they suddenly had this moment where he was a lot influenced by silent movies. The makeup is pretty dark, the hair is a little bit like 1920s. There was a Marlene Dietrich moment he went through, you know. And then in his later work, it got more loose, you know. But I remember this. I was like, there's something there. And it was always... You know, it was grain, it was photography. They shot it with a 30s, it was always a little bit out of focus, you know. So there's you know, look, today, for example, when we look at Hitchcock, you know, and you know they're driving in a car, and the background goes like this, you know, and you're thinking, but that's cinema. That is it. It's not real. It's cinema. And if you know, Grace Kelly would have sit in a real car and the background would have been real, it would have not been that. And that little off that what Peter had, it's his world. It's not your world, and he's inviting you, you know? Sorry, I talk too much, right?
No.
Peter has an incredible mythology. And only the really best photographers of the last 100 years have that complete, complex mythology. Carl Gustav Jung says the mythology is what we like to be without being aware of it. The idea you have of a man, of a woman, of a child, of a lover is your own mythology. You may not be aware of it, but you have it. The idea a photographer can suggest to you, mythology is what is there, but what is outside the frame. Now, if you look at Peter Lindbergh's pictures, or when you look at Helmut Newton pictures, you can see that the glass on his table would have been a very specific, probably kind of Frenchy, a little bit particular glass, like a wine glass. You know, you had the chairs. There would be never a model of Peter Lindbergh sitting in a BMW or in a Lamborghini, you know. The visual mythology in his pictures was so precise that everybody in this room can imagine the chair the girl is sitting on without you seeing the chair. It's a wooden chair. It's not this, you know. That's incredible. When you get to Newton has it, you know. Maybe, you know, some of the really good guys, the world is so complex that you know it without seeing it, you know.
Beautiful. I think that's a very beautiful place to end. So, Vincent Peters, thank you very, very much.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thank you.